All right. Well, welcome everyone. It is 5:40, so we are going to get started right away. Thank you for joining us. My name is Tim Constant. I'm the Associate Director of Teacher Education and Outreach at the Holocaust Memorial Center in Farmington Hills, Michigan. And this is our session, Teaching the Human Story. And we're really excited to be presenting this session with you because we're going to take a look at resources that our teacher advisory group has created that focuses on poetry and survivor testimony and photographs. So we're really excited for you to join us. So I'm going to have my co-presenters introduce themselves real quick, and then we will get started right into the content. So Dan, you want to start?
Yeah. Well, everybody, thank you for coming to hear us this evening. My name is Dan Saint Laurent. I have been teaching American history and world history and English at Lakeshore High School for the last 9 years now. It's my second year working with the teacher advisory group at the Holocaust Memorial Center. I'm a 2016 Transatlantic Fellow, really awesome program there. I've been able to teach in Europe, I've been able to teach in China, and this is just a really awesome experience now to be helping other teachers and providing them with materials.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Dan. Angela, over to you.
Hi, I'm Angela Chea. I teach at Dexter High School. I think I am finishing up my 21st year, my 22nd year teaching. And I teach about the Holocaust. I teach an IB 20th Century World History course. I've taken courses at the Echoes and Reflections through the Holocaust Memorial Center. And I've been on the teacher advisory group last year, and then also currently on the group this year. Nice to see everyone.
Great, thank you. And Michelle?
Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Michelle Curtin. I am a history teacher at Lake Orion High School in Lake Orion, Michigan. I teach a ton of different classes, history of ethnic and gender studies, history of world religions, world history, African-American history. I'm also my district's diversity and equity coordinator. I have had the privilege and pleasure of working on the teacher advisory group for 2 years. I also have had the privilege of presenting some cultural competency professional development for the docents at the Holocaust Museum. So thank you for attending our session this evening.
Great, yes, thank you. And just a couple shout outs and mentions. Corey Harbaugh, who's an incredible supporter of the Holocaust Center, has joined us. Corey won't be presenting, but Corey, it's wonderful to see you. And Doug is also a current teacher advisory group member. So he is, I see him on there. So Doug, thanks for joining us. So I want to start out giving you just a little bit of a background on the teacher advisory group from the Holocaust Center, how this came to be and how this project and the resources that was created, how this came about. And it's going to be great because Dan and Angela and Michelle are going to share with you in more detail some of the resources and show you where to be able to find it on our website. So as we had mentioned, that we have this teacher advisory group in this current school year is actually cohort 2. Dan, Angela, and Michelle were in cohort 1, but they're also in cohort 2 as well. And so the resources that they're going to be presenting to you is a product that we had created in the very first cohort. And so our teacher advisory group's last school year we really had 2. We had one that was focused in the area of social studies, and we had a second one that was focused on ELA resources, and which some people may say, why ELA? Well, it's interesting that, and Corey has mentioned this several times, that the Holocaust is usually first brought up and studied in ELA classrooms through young adult literature. And then when you get into high school, that's when you start to get into the Holocaust content. So these are our overarching objectives that we had for our teacher advisory group. The first one was looking at how to brainstorm and recommend new educational programs and resources that teachers need or want. And the focus of our teacher advisory group was to be able to create products, create resources that was created by teachers. The Holocaust Center didn't want to create something and then present it to teachers, hand it to teachers and say, now please use this, right? So as classroom teachers, you're working with students daily, and so you are the experts. And so we wanted to tap into the experts and find out what was needed and what was wanted. The second objective was to evaluate current and proposed programming to ensure that met the needs of teachers, schools, and districts and their curriculum goals and standards. And then the third objective was to inform the Holocaust Memorial Center of educational trends. Again, with teachers being the experts, you are informing us and educating us at the center. And then to advocate for the Holocaust Memorial Center's educational programming and resources. So to be able to help with outreach, to be able to spread the word. So when we started looking as a group, at resources and what we could create, we looked at this resource from Echoes and Reflections. So Echoes and Reflections is a collaboration of 3 organizations. It's a collaboration of the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, Yad Vashem from Israel, and the USC Shoah Foundation. And these 3 organizations collaboratively work together on this free resource referred to as Echoes and Reflections. And that resource is echoesandreflections.org is where you would find that. And in Echoes and Reflections, they had identified 9 pedagogical principles for effective Holocaust instruction. And here are the 9: defining terms, providing a background on the history of anti-Semitism, contextualizing history, teaching the human story, which is part of the title of this session, using primary source materials, making the Holocaust relevant, encouraging inquiry-based learning and critical thinking, fostering empathy, and the last one, ensuring a supportive learning environment. Now, a lot of these pedagogical principles, they're very connected with each other. So for example, teaching the human story is strongly, I feel, connected to fostering empathy, right? One of the strongest ways to foster empathy is to teach the human story. So as a teacher advisory group, we looked at these pedagogical principles and said, what do teachers need? And we wanted to develop resources to be able to teach the human story, to help foster empathy, and to help teachers be able to contextualize the history, to be able to contextualize resources. So by looking at pedagogy 5, this pedagogical principle 5, the primary source materials, that became the focus. And how do we, what resources do we develop for teachers? So that's kind of the foundation of the product. So then what we did is we looked at our tour themes. So we have 7 at the Holocaust Center of themes that if you come and take a docent-led tour of the Holocaust Center, these are the 7 themes, tour themes that we really focus on. Look at number 1, teaching the human story, right? 2, choice. 3, dehumanization. The 4th theme, looking at light in the darkness. A lot of times when you study the Holocaust, You focus so much on the darkness, but not on the light in the darkness. The fifth is looking at resilience and resistance. The sixth theme, indifference, and how we view the other. And then the seventh theme is this returning to life. So when Dan, Angela, and Michelle share some of these resources with you, these themes were a major focus. We really were taking a look at the combination of those pedagogical principles for effective Holocaust instruction in combination with these 7 themes. And so what came about was the teacher advisory group developed resources, and these are on the website, and they're going to show you where to be able to find it. And we're going to examine some of these, right? And they're going to talk you through on how these resources were created and some ideas of how to use these resources in your classroom. So these are 7 different education guides that were created. These are free, open source on our website, using a combination of some focus on poetry, some focus on photography, survivor testimony. So it's a combination of different types of primary sources. So I'm going to hand it over to our teacher advisory group members, and Dan's going to get us started. But Dan, before you start, I just want to open up the floor really quick to see if there's anybody that has any comments or questions regarding kind of the background, the foundation, the history of what we were attempting to approach here with the teacher advisory group. If you had any comments before Dan shows us one of the first resources. I'm going to practice my wait time here for a minute, see if anybody has any comments in the chat. Okay, good. So Angela has shared in the chat the link to where the guides are. All right, so Dan, I'm going to hand it over to you, and let's take a look at one of the ones that you had focused on.
Sure thing. Thanks, Tim. Thanks for the intro, Tim, and kind of bringing everyone up to speed about what we're all about. And thanks to the entire TAG team from 2019-2020 school year. This definitely was a collaborative effort. You see 3 of us here, but there were many of us working many long nights at the museum putting these contextualizations together. So we want to tell the human story, and our goal was to provide materials and lessons for teachers that may have never taught the Holocaust before, and they need something that they can bring to their classroom. It could be for a teacher that has taught the Holocaust frequently, but now they're getting something new to add to their toolbox. Or we also want to be able to provide some historical context for the English teacher that does a fantastic job teaching the literature, but needs a little bit of help on the historical side of things. Essentially, what we wanted to do was create a companion piece that can reinforce the great things that teachers are already doing in the classroom. We wanted to create something that was very user-friendly. The link has been posted. If you look at the teacher resources, these were definitely created with teacher ease in mind. I chose a survivor testimony that I'm going to pull up here in just a moment. Hopefully I can make that work for us here. All right. I chose a survivor testimony of Auschwitz survivor Paula Leibovitz. I picked her in a survivor testimony because from my experience, my students seem to really be impacted by hearing those survivor testimonies. It seems to speak directly to the kids. The testimonies are great because they're short, but very impactful. You can base an entire class around one of these, or you can kick off a class with one of these. The video testimonial comes from the USC Shoah, as mentioned. I'm not going to pull up the clip, but if you click on it, it will take you directly to the clip, to the video clip of this woman's testimony. It provides all the pertinent information that you might want to know. You know, who is the speaker? When was this recording taken? Where was this video accessed from? And as we go through, you get all the information you need as a teacher to prepare yourself to present this material in class. So you get a description of the source itself. This is her firsthand account of her liberation from Auschwitz. Continue to read, you get the biography of this woman, her experiences before and after liberation. Now we get to the kind of the mechanics of it all, the lesson plan information. Most of us, I can't speak for every single one, but most of us picked a source that could be used pretty much from 6th grade or above. You know, some might work a little bit better in 9th or 10th, or some might be a little bit better for the higher level students, but pretty much it's going to have that broad appeal. We're going to have Holocaust topics that we all of these contextualizations. For example, in this one, we're going to see the context, the contextualization and the topic of rescuers, the survivors and liberators. Who are the people that lived? Who helped them live? Who helped them get out? And children of the Holocaust. And then back to a slide Tim showed a while ago of themes that the Holocaust Memorial Center likes to support. We put those themes in these contextualizations. So the themes I chose were the human story and then returning to life. You know, it seems to be a lot of us when we teach the Holocaust, we talk about when it's over, but we don't really talk about what happened after in our classroom. So this video, this contextualization will help with that. For the people who want to know the nitty gritty, we can see the connections to the state framework. We can see the connections to the C3 framework as well. What we will also do when we contextualize this video, we want this video to make sense if you are going to use it in class. It's giving you information that you would need to successfully present to your students, but also be prepared for any particular questions that you might need. We also direct you to then other sources that could aid you on this particular topic. Now, what I would like to show you is going back to the beginning here. This particular source, it says you have to click to view. You have to have an eyewitness account. Eyewitness is a free account. What it does is it guarantees us that that clip will always be there. If we went from YouTube, that clip might be taken down at one point in time or might be mislabeled, but we can pull it right up, pretty simple, click right on it. It's going to take me right to where I need to go to pull up this testimonial. Not going to have us watch the entire video clip. I just want you to be prepared and familiar with what it would look like.
With Paula, a lot of people have bad memories from that, but I have a good one. I'm very grateful. As I was relating it to Petrenko when he came to visit Los Angeles, that I had a particular wonderful story about a soldier picking me up, sitting down and rocking me in his arms, and the tears were just flowing down his face. And I can never forget that as long as I live. Just to look at him and figuring in my head, to me there's somebody out there curious about me. It was the first time I had this kind of feeling. I thought, oh, maybe your mother or somebody, but somebody caring about me. It was overwhelming. He wanted to share his food, and he had slonina, which is like slab bacon. And I showed him my stash of bread, and I said, no, that's all I want, is the bread. Look how much I have. But I did take a little piece of his black bread. He had that Russian black bread, but he didn't have very much.
So part of the reason I chose this video, and it is a little bit longer, I didn't want to show the whole thing, is it does talk about the after. It gives us human story of the after, that when she was released from camp, there were people to help. And if you look on the right-hand side here, it will take us to other videos, other topics that she talks about in her time in camp and her time from the release from camp. Good thing about this particular lesson, it could be anywhere from a warm-up activity, which I have used this as a warm-up activity to kick off a Holocaust day in class, when I usually do about a 2-week unit, but you could also make an entire day of it yourself in class with your students. Okay. Want to pass things off to my colleague Angela here, and she's going to tell us about her project.
Thank you, Dan. It's nice to see everybody here, and I'm really happy about the turnout we have. And so let me go ahead and share my screen. And so I just have a link directly to the website, so you can see how you might go to the website and how you might click on the different resources. And then what I was going to do is take you through a possible way that you might use this in class. So the format for all of these is the same. It's got the source, and I'm going to come back to the source in just a second. Background information, et cetera, on it, lesson planning information. I'm not going to go through all of that again because Dan did a really good job of explaining what is there. But so if I was going to use the source in class, so let me go back really quick then just to the poem. So a little bit about the source. Let me make it a little bit smaller. So Franta Bass was in the Terezin ghetto, also known as Theresienstadt, and he was 14 years old when he was transferred from the ghetto to Auschwitz, and there he was executed. And so this was a poem that he wrote while he was in the Terezin ghetto. And there were multiple poems, and I came across this when I picked up a book, and actually I think it was at the Holocaust Center. I Never Saw Another Butterfly, which has poems and drawings of children who were at the Terezin ghetto. And it was just, for me, it was really powerful because it was so simple, but it said so much in it. And so that was the poem that I chose. And so a couple of different ways that you could use this. So you could, in terms of topics, you could talk about pre-war Jewish life, and that's how I was going to kind of introduce this topic to you. But you could also use this in the middle of a unit talking about the ghettos, and you could also use this when you're talking about different ways of resistance and spiritual resistance. So the way that I would likely use this, I have used other poems in class, but I haven't used this poem yet. But I would start off with pictures of life in different Jewish communities throughout Europe. And so I would pull this up with the class, go through the pictures, give students questions beforehand to answer. Just what do you see in the photos? What emotions do you see being expressed in the photos? Do you see any similarities, differences between the photos? Clues in the photos to where they were taken, when they were taken. And so I'd have a list set up. So I would share the list with students, maybe in a Google Doc, if I were doing this online, or if this were in a classroom, I would project the list on the screen and maybe have students like journal it in a notebook. But as you go through the images, they're just normal everyday life in a bunch of different communities. And so after going through the images, I'd have students write down what they're seeing, what they think about what they're seeing. And then we discuss it as a class. And one of the things that I would want to get across with the students and hopefully, bring out from them as I ask these questions are that, these are normal, everyday, scenes. People are happy, people are having fun. There's a variety of different communities. In terms of time and place, you can see that this is pre-war, that, things, this is just normal everyday life. So I want to kind of set up before we get into a study of the Holocaust that, there were these vibrant, thriving Jewish communities throughout Europe. Some were in rural areas, some were in big cities, You have different levels of just participation in Jewish religious life. It was all over the place. So that would be the first thing I would do. And then I would go from that into, let me go back to the PDF. So as you have like the screen with the photos, I would ask students if they know, which countries have the most, the largest Jewish communities in Europe pre-World War II. Which countries do you think had just large communities, small communities? You think Jewish communities, were they mostly rural? Were they mostly urban? And so that would just be like a short question and answer. And then I have a map. Let's see if I'd have all this set up before, but I wanted to actually keep going back to this so that you could see that all the resources are here. So the map itself I'd bring up. And so this is the Echoes and Reflection website. And there are a bunch of different resources here. So this is the map. So I would transition to the map and let students notice that the Soviet Union, that Poland had large communities, that the communities might be relatively small in other places. If you look at Germany, I think it's less than 1% beforehand, which might surprise students that it was a small percentage of the population, but it would give you an opportunity to talk about how they're concentrated in certain large cities, talk about the differences between Jewish communities, maybe in an urban area in Germany versus a rural area in Poland or the Soviet Union, once again, getting at that diversity of Jewish life. So then at that point, I would give the poem for students to read. And then I would give them questions to ask about the poem. What emotions do you see being expressed in the poem? How do you know these emotions are being expressed? So pick out the lines that demonstrate that these are the emotions. Have students pick out 1 or 2 lines that are the most powerful to them. And then call on students in the classroom to talk about what is it about those lines that makes it so powerful. And then go back to, are there clues about this poem? So right now the students, I have not introduced to the students who Frantabas is. So I talked about this to you, but for the students, I want them to read the poem first. So read the poem and then ask them the same questions. Are there any clues in the poem to time or place? And so I'm hoping that students would pick out, even if I should die from hunger, I will never be ashamed, even though I'm suppressed. So this idea that he is living through some type of struggle. And then once we have that conversation, then talk about who he was and talk about the fact that he was in a transit camp with a lot of other Jewish children. And the children were encouraged in this camp secretly to write poems, and these were secretly stored. And just depending on where you want to go with this, you could give more or less information about Theresienstadt. But let them know that these were saved. Some of the poems, some of the drawings were saved, but nobody knows who actually wrote them. They're anonymous. Others, they link them to a person. Some of them survived. Most of them did not survive the Holocaust. So then at this point, there are different ways that you could go depending on what resources that you want to use. So I think a couple of the best ones, well, actually there's a lot of different ways you could go, but so you could link to Theresienstadt itself and life in the ghettos. And so there are a couple of different great resources, and you could have students read, and there are different critical thinking questions at the bottom of the different resources. And another way that you could go with this, so spiritual resistance is another one from the same website, so I won't go there. But you could link it to the book itself. So I purchased the book, so I have copies of all the poems that I've scanned for my students. And so you could have different students or pairs of students, small groups of students pick different poems. So that would be another direction. So you could go in a more like literature, poetry oriented direction and have students share back. You could go in a more like concrete historical context, have students read more about the camps, go that direction. Or another thing that you could do is if you're doing this at the beginning of the unit, this would be your introduction, have the poem, and then shift from there to pre-war life in Germany and discuss, the steps, of anti-Semitism and how it led to the situation that's being expressed in the poem. And I think that is it. I'm going to stop the share there. And that's all I have. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle if she's ready.
Okay. I am ready. Hello,
Great.
everyone. Thank you, Dan, Angela, and Tim. I am going to quickly share my screen with you, with the group. Okay, you should see the Holocaust screen in front of you. Is that correct? Just want to make sure. Okay, so when we initially started our work with the companion guides, I actually had two big ideas in mind that we discussed. One was not telling a single story of the Holocaust, and also two, creating some tool for teachers to use to give them foundational information to teach the Holocaust. I think we as a group decided that it's easier for teachers to teach topics when they're comfortable, of course, but also if the information is right at their fingertips. So that's the beauty of the companion guide. Easy access for teachers. They can get the background information, the biographical information for the people involved, the authors. They can find out how to find the necessary tools to teach. So all of those were very important as we began this journey of creating these companion guides. So I decided to focus on a photo. And this particular photo that you see has been circulating around the internet, and it was quite popular. And I wanted to engage my students in a conversation about the power of pictures and photos. And I just want to encourage historians, ELA teachers, whomever, to make sure that we use different type of resources to present history or to present the topic of the Holocaust. And photos and pictures are very, very powerful. Oftentimes when we teach the story of the Holocaust, it's usually one single narrative. And in order to avoid this, the Teacher Companion Guide gives a nice, well-rounded, foundational look at the way in which we can teach the Holocaust. So I presented this photo to my students who were my guinea pig in the beginning of this, just to have some conversation. I think a wonderful entry point when you have photos and pictures are visible or visual thinking strategies. What do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? Think, pair, share. All of those great visible thinking strategies that will allow students to think about what they're looking at and share their thinking. So I think a great entry point for any photograph is a visual thinking strategy, which I'll show you a breakdown of that in a moment. So again, as Angela and Dan have already pointed out, we did gather the primary source information to give credit to the person who took the photograph, and also to give some context in terms of when it was taken. So that was a very important piece that actually takes a lot longer than you think, because you want to make sure that you give credit as needed. And that's a very important piece. And then, of course, through the process of planning our lesson, we wanted to think about the topics that were important as well as the themes. The theme that resonated with this particular photo would be resilience and resistance. So as we began thinking about the themes and the topics, I thought, what does resistance mean? What does resilience mean? So a great entry point for teachers for foundational information is to actually put yourself in the chair of the student. Because this is teacher created and student centered, it gave us the opportunity to begin thinking like a student and to think about what students would want to know and what information that we wanted them to know as well. So we went through this whole process, and I went through this process of thinking of words and also ideas that would come about as I began to ask myself the next question. Okay, what does resistance mean? Okay, but why would a menorah represent resistance? Okay, what does this Nazi flag mean? So as we began to ask ourselves these questions, we began to have more and more information that we needed to explore. And the beauty of this is that we have done all of the work for the teacher. So if you're a science teacher, ELA teacher, math teacher, history teacher, if you would like to contextualize this primary source document, this companion guide has all of this information there for the teacher at their fingertips. So they don't have to think about their own thinking of this. They can do that, but they can also go within this companion guide and pull out all of those big ideas and important information that they need throughout. So we were able to go through and just identify all these big ideas that were important for this one photograph that was presented to the students and will be presented to the students. And in contextualizing the information, we also went through to identify resources. Teachers want to make sure that the resources they're using are authentic, are peer-reviewed at sometimes, just good resources to use that you can give your students and you know that they're solid resources. So we have a collection of these resources that will align with all of these big idea topics here. So it's a pretty well-rounded look at this particular topic in the Holocaust, which is resilience, that is presented in this photograph. And then some additional lesson planning, just giving you some ideas of what you can do, some of the pre-learning and pre-thinking while students are viewing the photography, just different ideas of what they can do in order to probe their thinking and also to tap into their critical thinking skills. And then this is the visual thinking strategy that I would always encourage anyone to use if they are viewing a photograph with their students, because you want to tap into their prior knowledge and also their background, their personal feelings and thoughts about it, and give them the opportunity to have those conversations. So I think it's always important to put in a VTS or a visible thinking strategy to help students think about that image that is right there in front of them. And I also want to show you that, as you can see and has already been outlined, that we did really tap into our standards. And as you can see here, I'm a big fan of the C3 framework. I think it's important. I think it's relevant. I think it is a great way to think about action and what you can do with this information. I think it also allows our students to tap into their critical thinking skills and high-level thinking skills as well. So all of that is outlined for teachers so that they don't have to really think about trying to figure out how to tell this story. The information is presented here. So it eliminates the single story of, okay, this is a photograph, okay, someone was brave. Okay, let's dig deeper as to why they needed to be brave. Let's dig deeper as to what this photograph means. And let's make sure that we're telling a well-rounded story about this particular photograph. And that is the beauty, again, of the Education Companion Guide, because it allows us to tell this well-rounded story. And also, and I think what is so incredibly important for teachers, is that the information is right there. How to go about planning the lesson, that foundational information that's important to do, and also some tips to help your students look at this photograph in front of them and then tap into those higher level thinking skills and those critical thinking skills. So that is, again, the beauty of this Holocaust Education Companion Guide, which has already been mentioned, but is pretty easy to find through the Holocaust website. If you go to Learn, and then you'll go to Teacher Advisory, and then all of the guides are located there. Okay.
Fantastic. So, so let's open up the floor for some questions or for some comments. Michelle, if you just want to end the share screen.
Yes,
so
I'm going to stop sharing. There we
see
go.
Everybody and see
Yes,
everyone's
sorry.
name. And I'll show you one more time on the Holocaust Memorial Center's website where you would find that and a few additional resources as well. I want to show you. But let's open up the floor. So if anybody would like to unmute and give us what your thoughts. What are you thinking about these guides? Or maybe it would be a thought about how you would use it in your classroom. So I'm opening up the floor. Anyone would like to unmute and tell us your thoughts, or if you have any questions for Dan, Angela, and Michelle.
Actually, Tim, before anybody asks any questions, I just want to say that until 2 or 3 years ago, even though I had taught regularly about the Holocaust, I was afraid to use poetry and short stories in the classroom because I'm not an English teacher. I was never trained in the pedagogy of how do you teach a poem or how do you teach a short story? What kinds of discussion questions do you ask? And so to me, that was a big hurdle to get over. But once I started using them in the classroom, I realized that it's kind of freeing to me and to the students that it's not an English classroom. There's no one right answer to like what the meaning of a poem is. And so everybody can be just much more relaxed, and you get a very broad range of, I think, responses from students with certain poems. And so, and once I saw the reaction of the students, especially if you don't typically use them in the classroom, the reaction was so positive that that's really what kept me, like, you know, into using poems. So that's, so I started 2 or 3 years ago, and I'm like eventually getting more comfortable myself, but it is a hurdle if you haven't used this kind of material in the classroom.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. When we were as a advisory group, when we were taking a look at various primary sources, including poetry, it was, I think a lot of people were surprised, right, about how powerful poetry can be and how engaging it can be, right? And we found so many different poems that we wanted to use, but you have a limited amount of time to be able to try to develop things. I'm so glad that you had mentioned that, and it's such a powerful tool to be able to teach the Holocaust. Any comments or questions?
I have a question, if you don't mind.
Yes, Patty, go ahead.
I was just wondering, I noticed the photograph that was used as an example here was kind of one of symbolism. You know, we know there's a lot more, I would say, like graphic photographs of you know, what happened to people in the Holocaust. Is it your recommendation that you do focus on like the symbols and things like that in a classroom? Because we have a lot of very highly sensitive students.
Yeah, and thank you for that question. Yes, one of the things that we want to do in Holocaust education is we want to be very sensitive to what we show, right? Because you can't unsee something, right? And regarding the Holocaust and other genocides, it can be very graphic and very traumatizing, right? And so when we were looking at those pedagogical principles, there are great ways to be able to teach the Holocaust without showing those graphic images, right? And teaching the themes and the lessons. And so I really appreciate that question. So that's one of the things at the Holocaust Memorial Center that we really focus on. And poetry is one of those tools that can be used to be able to teach the Holocaust without traumatizing. I always share the example of, we had a special exhibit at the Holocaust Center that was, it was called Filming the Camps. And it was unedited filming of the liberation of camps, right? And I'm an adult. I've seen a lot, and I was traumatized by seeing these images and these videos and things that I will not be able to unsee. And I'll never forget, we're doing a teacher workshop